message. It doesn't seem possible, but in a few months it will be 19 years since in the summer of 1992, campaigning for my first run at the Missouri Senate, that I signed the U.S. Term Limits Pledge. I remember I signed it at an outdoor park pavilion in Sikeston, Missouri, where we had a press event, not nearly as well attended as this one. But I went on the record there as a strong supporter of term limits. The voters, about 3 months later, rendered their unambiguous verdict on the question by grafting it onto our Constitution by supermajorities. And I can tell you that as one who is out among Missourians in all parts of our state every month, sentiment has not changed. The numbers reflected in the poll that I have just that we've just heard from Phil are what I hear from Missourians in coffee shops and barber shops and diners and main streets across this state. So I am here to say that I think SJR 12 ought to die, deserve death this week, and not be sent to the voters, because it would be duplicative of effort we went through 19 years ago and entirely unnecessary. So I'm hopeful that the House won't even take it up, or if they do take it up, the representatives will defeat it.
I want to thank you all for coming. My name is Philip Blumel. I'm president of an organization called U.S. Term Limits. We're based in Fairfax, Virginia. We've been around since 1991, and our goal is to enact and defend term limits, usually by voter referendum, across the country. And the reason why I'm here today is to make a brief statement about the challenge faced by Missouri's voter-approved 8-year term limits law. In 1992, Missouri citizens collected an enormous number of signatures to put an idea on the ballot that would limit the terms of members of the House and of the Senate to 8 terms each. Now, this was a well-known limit. It's the same one that is most common in the United States of America. It's the 8-year limit that is faced by the president and also by the governor of the state. And when it appeared on the ballot, it passed with 75% of the vote. Now, their faith in the idea back in 1992 has been affirmed by experience. Now it's nearly 20 years later, and in a poll that was released on May 1st, done by Pulse Opinion Research, citizens in Missouri by 77% say they like the law as is and object to this change. And why not? Term limits encourage regular competitive elections, and we've seen that. They improve citizen access to the process. They bring a broader range of experience and of perspectives to the legislature. They reduce the inequities of power from district to district due to seniority, and they broaden the circle of those that have an intimate knowledge of state government. In sum, term limits bring the legislature closer to the people. Yet last month, the Missouri State Senate, in a 29-4 vote, approved a measure that would abolish the voter-approved 8-year term limit and replace it with a more politician-friendly 16-year limit. And now the House is considering this bill, SJR 12, and I'm here to urge them to reject it. Now, if the House doesn't reject it, the voters surely will, because it has to go to the ballot before it changes the law. Because as I noted in this poll that came out May 1st, specifically 77% of respondents said that they object to replacing the current voter-approved 8-year limit with a new 16-year limit. All right? So why is this change even being proposed? Well, voters believe they know the answer to that question. In the same poll, when asked if the motivation behind this proposal was better government, only 9% said that that was the reason. 9%. Whereas 78% said that they believed the motivation of those who voted for this was simply to keep themselves in power. Now, that 78% is made up of 65% of the Democrats that were asked, 78% of the Republicans, and 89% of the independents that were asked that question. Now, This is not a partisan issue, clearly. Now, we're told by some politicians here in Jefferson City, and I've heard this in other capitals where this has been tried, that we're only putting the issue on the ballot for the voters to decide. All right? Doing us a favor. Well, the folks that spent the time, energy, and money to put it on the ballot, and then those that passed it by 75% of the vote, aren't there asking for a revote. The constituents of the members of this legislature are not out there asking for a revote. And there's no polls out there that indicates that the citizens of this state are not happy with this law. In fact, I just pointed to some polling that shows that the opposite is true. So putting this back on the ballot is not a favor to the voters. In fact, if you think about it, it's going to mean that more money, time, and energy is going to have to be expended by citizens in order to defend their citizens' initiative. Now, we're also told that the 16-year limit is not really a significant change because, after all, even now, you can serve 8 years in one house of legislature and 8 years in the other. However, it is a significant change. If you move from one body to the other, you cannot do so as an incumbent with all of the advantages that incumbency brings. You have to do it as a challenger, probably running against another ex-incumbent or against an incumbent. This is precisely what politicians want to avoid, and this is precisely why this is a significant change and why it's a significantly bad one. So SJR 12 is a rerun of a sitcom that I've seen played out in many different states. It seems like every year in a couple states that have legislative term limits, there's 15, an idea is floated to weaken or abolish these limits. Usually it does not get all the way through to the ballot, because after one house passes it, some polling's done, they get some pushback, and it's dropped, as it should be here. But in states where it has gotten through the ballot, in Maine and in South Dakota, are examples that come immediately to mind, the voters reject the new proposal and reaffirm their support for the original law. In no state have the voters weakened or abolished their legislative term limits at the ballot box, and Missouri is not going to be the first. Now, in light of all this, I want to mention the 4 senators who voted to put their own, put the citizens' interests above their own in voting against this measure. They were Jane Cunningham, Jack Goodman, Will Kraus, and Brian Nieves.